Today we're talking about putting factory gauges into your 66, 67 Chevelle that did not come with factory gauges. Here we have the temp gauge and oil gauge. Over here is the fuel and the battery. Now this kit it comes with the instructions. Here's your copper line for your oil gauge. Here's your water temperature sending unit. Here's an inline fuse for the amp gauge. Comes with all your nuts and a jumper wire to put these in your car. Now over here we have a 66, 67, this one actually is a 66 gauge cluster that I refurbished using one of our Ausley's new lenses and the chrome bezel on the outside, and now we're going to show you how to install these into this housing. Okay, here we have the back of the unit. We're taking out the old clock, and on that side you put in the oil and the temperature gauge. Now these things fit kind of tight, so you may have to jiggle around a little bit and hold your mouth just right to get them in there. This one goes in pretty good. The one on the other side is a little bit tight. This is a very easy installation. You just put it in and put your nuts back in, and there's one side done. Now over on the other side, the fuel and battery side is quite of a tight fit, as you will see. This makes a very nice accessory addition to your restoration, and all of these parts are furnished here at Ausley's. Now this is the one that you'll notice is kind of hard to get in, but you have to, be patient and get it down in there, as the hole is quite very small. There we go. Now we got that in there, and you put your nuts back in, and we'll show you the finished product from the other side, and then we'll show you how to hook up all the gauges to make them work. Now you have the look of factory gauges in your car. Now we did recondition all this by glass beading the metal housing, repainting it, putting a new lens, as I stated before, and a new bezel around the outside. We cleaned the speedometer and so forth. Now you will have to black out some of the parts down here in the bottom. Do not black out your bright light for your high beam headlights, but you'll need to black out the backside of these two here so that you won't be able to see your idiot light, where your idiot lights came through on the original one. Okay, here we have the back side of this cluster. Now in this application we are using a factory dash wiring harness, 4 gauges. The actual conversion is to go into a car that didn't come with gauges, but if you're going to have to buy a dash harness and a forward light harness, both which we offer at Ausley's, we suggest that you go ahead and buy the gauge dash harness and the gauge forward light harness, because in this application it's easier to hook up. Now on your gas gauge you've got your pink and your light brown wire. It just hooks directly on the gauge just like the factory did. Now over on the amp gauge you've got 2 wires, and they will not fit on the back of the gauge, so you're going to have to cut the 2 wires and put the ends on them that go on the ends with the round hole. We have one over here, and you have to put that on there to crimp and put over the stud. Now the studs, one of them will have red on the end, which donates positive, and then the other one will be a negative. Now your 2 wires are black, one with a white stripe. The one with the white stripe is the positive, and the manufacturer suggests that you put the inline fuse on somewhere in that line. However, being we're using a factory gauge dash harness, it already has a provision for a fuse over here with the gauges, so in that case you would have 2 fuses on the gauges. Now that is necessary if you put it in a car without the factory gauge harness, but in this case we're not going to use it because we have one on the fuse box. And be sure that, like I said, the black wire with the white is for the positive, and then the solid black wire is the negative. And also on that inline fuse, it takes a 5 amp fuse. As I stated earlier, we blacked out the back of this gauge cluster so that the lights wouldn't shine through, But what we've done here is just put tape over the holes, which serves two purposes. One, to keep light from going through, and second, to keep dust from getting into your gauge cluster. Now over here, we're coming up on the temperature gauge. The temperature gauge, once again, you're going to have to cut the wires and put the little clips on the end. Now the pink wire is the positive, which goes on the stud with the red on the end, and the green goes on the negative side. Once you cut those wires, they just self-explanatory, they go on the positive and the negative. Then over to the oil side, the oil side has your copper line, and the copper line, of course, you hook onto your gauge and runs out through the firewall and hooks up to your engine. Now next, what we're going to show is how to hook up this same gauge cluster with a car that does not have factory gauge wiring harness. So it'll be an idiot light harness, so if you don't need to change that harness, we'll show you how to hook it up. Okay, now what we have here is a non-gauge dash harness, and we're going to show you how to hook it up to a car once you put your gauges in your housing. First of all, your gas gauge just plugs directly on just like the factory. And then next comes your amp gauge, which we're going to skip over and do that one last because it's a little more complicated. Now on the bottom here, we're going to use the pink and the blue wire, and we're going to just simply take the bulb out of it and put it back in the hole just to keep dust and all out of it. Then we're going to tape over the next hole to keep the dust and stuff out of it, along with over on the other side, the inside hole, we're going to tape it up to keep dust out. All right, over here we have the green and the pink wire, which goes to your temperature gauge. Now it will not reach, and what we suggest is, of course, you're going to have to clip the wires and adapt another wire to it to run over to the gauge, tape it into your harness, bring it over, and hook it up. Your pink wire being your 12 volt or your positive, and the green wire going to your negative or going to your sending unit. And as you look out under the hood, you'll see that same green wire going to your temperature sending unit outside. Then over to your oil gauge is simply run your metal copper line through the firewall and hook it up accordingly to get your manual gauge there. Okay, now we're coming back to the amp gauge, which is a little more tricky. Now with this amp gauge, you're going to have to run two wires out under the hood, and we'll discuss where they go. But once again, you have the positive side with the red on it, and then your negative side here. You're going to have to put your fittings on here, run them, run your wire long enough. Now from the factory, it came through your harness and went through your fuse box and two holes that are not being used on the fuse box. As you can see there, there's no prongs there, so you can simply run those wires through there or run them through one of your other existing holes. And where these two wires will go is your positive wire is going to go over to the horn relay. Now as it goes to the horn relay, that's where your inline fuse is going to need to go, your 5 amp inline fuse, which comes with the kit. That goes there. Then your other wire goes over to the negative side, over to the junction block mounted on the front fender. Now that should complete the whole circuit and make your amp gauge work. Okay, we hope this helps you with your application of the factory gauges into your car. This video, along with these instructions, which give you a pretty good detailed idea of how it goes, between the both of them, I think you'll have no problem in hooking up these gauges in your car.